Hi, and welcome back to my channel, Pathways to God and Significance. My name is Michael Venema. Thanks so much for joining in. What I try to do in this channel is to post videos which are really repackagings of Sunday morning messages that I would give at my church. And this message happens to be called A Big Fishing Net, Bycatch, and Good Fish. And I'm going to be reading a Bible passage from Matthew chapter 13 in a couple of minutes. Well, you might remember the movie Forrest Gump. I think it's pre-2000. In it, we meet Forrest, who has some learning issues. The main thing, though, about Forrest is that he takes up running. And in the movie, his picture is splashed across the front of Time magazine, People magazine. He attracts a lot of followers. They come behind, jogging with him on the roads of America. Some of them are diehard fans, but many others have a limited commitment. But the thing about these fans is that they seem to come from all over the place, and there are many different kinds of people. Now, this is a little bit like Jesus. He travels up and down, back and forth across Israel, where the Jewish people lived in his time. And some of these followers are die-hard followers, but many others, well, you just didn't know. But they too are all kinds of people from all walks of life. So I want to begin by thinking a little bit about the travelers with Jesus. Now, if you know the Bible stories, you might remember some of these different kinds of people who traveled with him. Fishermen, who Jesus asked to come with him, a tax collector. There was Thomas, who was kind of a skeptic and needed persuasion now and then. There were James and John, two brothers. Their mother was a bit of an opportunist. You might remember the story of where she asked Jesus, when you establish your kingdom, couldn't my two sons have the places of honor right next to you, one on the right and one on the left? You know, it would be today like asking the Canadian Prime Minister, hey, Justin, when you win the next election, if you do, how about if my Johnny becomes the Secretary of Defense and my Jimmy becomes the Finance Minister? And we shouldn't forget Judas, who betrayed Jesus and got paid for it. And there were crowds of people who had been sitting under the teachings of the Jewish religious law for many years. There were some who felt that paying taxes to the Roman occupation government was wrong, and others who paid up without complaining. There were blind people looking for Jesus to heal them, even some little kids, and Jesus said about them, if they want to come along for the day, it's okay. Yes, we meet all kinds of people traveling with Jesus, people that gathered and followed him, and I think it's a very interesting crowd. Well, that kind of brings to mind the question of, if there's all these different kinds of people, you know, it might seem like a very positive thing, but it seems that this created a question for the disciples of Jesus, a question about membership standards. Now, that was a question that's related to something else that Jesus said earlier on, where Jesus says, I think it's also in Matthew 13, like not in 12, but I think in 13, don't pull out what you think are the weeds. He says this to his disciples. Now, Jesus did not want his followers to try and identify people who didn't belong and might want to get rid of them. It was not up to his disciples or his followers to uproot the weeds, so to speak, and toss out the people that they thought were no good into the garbage fire, so to speak. Jesus taught his followers not to worry about the weeds. In the end, God will do any sorting that needs to be done. But the parable we're looking at this morning, which I'm going to read in a couple of minutes, well, maybe more than a couple, maybe 3 or 4, but the parable we're looking at this morning is not so much about the fact that there seemed to be a number of bad actors, weeds, that the disciples noticed, but it's about the fact that there's such a wide variety of people taking an interest in Jesus. It was the question of how many different kinds of people should be permitted to follow Jesus. Shouldn't there be some membership standards? So I like to imagine the disciples thinking it through this way and maybe talking with Jesus in this way. Jesus, look at all the riffraff hanging out with our movement. It seems like everyone and their dog is following us around. As soon as the word gets out that you, Jesus, are coming to town, people act like it's Canada Day or the 4th of July. They line the streets. What about that little guy Zacchaeus climbing a tree to get your attention? We know you liked him a lot, but face it, he's the local town crook, and you even go to his place for dinner. Women with bleeding issues crowd you to be healed. Friends carry one of their friends who can't walk they carry him on a stretcher. They break through the roof of a perfectly good house to get him inside to you. Blind people interrupt your schedule. Kids run underfoot and disrupt the proceedings. And then, Jesus, there are the disciples of John the Baptist with their bothersome questions about whether you really are the Messiah. And your enemies, the Pharisees, hanging around, looking for ways to trip you up. And over there is the guy who thinks that you're going to make sure he gets a good inheritance. And you, Jesus, resupply the wine when it runs out at a wedding. Plus, you let big-time sinners hang around us. And you seem to enjoy hanging out with them yourself. You go to dinner with a professional swindler, the tax collectors for Rome, some women with pretty bad reputations. Even they don't seem to bother you. In fact, there's a bunch of them right over there. There goes our family rating. And what about the other women? Isn't it a bit unseemly for you, an obviously great rabbi, to have these women following you and for you teaching them? Most unusual. Think about it, Jesus. You are a great teacher of our Jewish faith. Most great teachers teach only men. What must people be thinking? Sometimes, Jesus, it's all too much. Is this really the kind of crowd you have in mind for the restored people of God himself? Don't we need to set the bar just a little higher, Jesus, and separate the wheat from the chaff, the sheep from the goats, the worthy from the unworthy? Well, Jesus, and this is the third thing I want to say about our passage, he ends up saying, well, actually, no. Just let them all be. We're casting the net wide. We'll catch whoever we can. And this is how Jesus puts it. Once again, Jesus says, the kingdom of heaven is like a net that was let down into the lake and caught all kinds of fish. When it was full, the fishermen pulled it up on the shore. Then they sat down, collected the good fish in baskets, but threw the bad away. This is how it will be at the end of the age. The angels will come and separate the wicked from the righteous and throw them into the blazing furnace, where there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth. Now, here in Nova Scotia, where I live, by the way, I want to comment a little bit about some of those hard words in that passage. Comment on that in a minute. But now, speaking of fishing and this whole illustration, here in Nova Scotia, where I live, people go out. A number of people go out on their fishing boats to make a living. Now, some of the fishing is done with nets. I'm no expert on fishing, but as far as I know, there are the good fish that the fishermen are after, and there is what's called the bycatch, the other fish that they really don't want but just happen to get caught in the nets anyway. And when the nets are hauled in, the fishermen toss out the bycatch, keeping the good fish for transportation and the market. And I would guess that in Jesus' time, the fishermen took the full nets onto shore. The bycatch would be just as much present as the good fish, but the fish you don't want, you got rid of them. You toss them into the garbage and into a fire. You don't want dead, decaying fish lying around attracting flies and making people ill. So you separate out the good fish from the bad, and you toss the bad into the garbage fire. Now, Jesus is, I think, thinking along these lines, and that there will come a time, he says, when to separate out the bycatch. That will happen, but right now Jesus says to his disciples, we are spreading the net as wide as we can. Let the people who enjoy being close to God, let them come. And who knows how many will prove to be first-rate, even though right now they might not look like prime material. Don't worry if some of the bycatch turns out to be bad. We'll sort them out later. There will be a time for that. What will that time be like? You might be wondering. Well, Jesus Christ will return to judge the living and those who have already died. There will be a lot of complaining, angry grinding of teeth, the grinding of teeth. In the Old Testament and the New Testament too, it seems that grinding of teeth is about extreme anger and bitter hatred. For example, Acts chapter 7, when the members of the Sanhedrin, the Jewish court, heard what Stephen had said, they were furious and gnashed or ground their teeth at him. There will be weeping too, Jesus says, and this may be weeping in sorrow or it may be weeping out of bitterness because the person does not get his or her way. Now we read these lines in our passage about weeping and gnashing of teeth and fire, and we may see these lines and thoughts may come to us about a literal fire, eternity, hell, and I don't want to in any way play fast and loose with this or with any part of the Bible. But we also have to avoid reading into those lines more than what's there. Now at this point, maybe the version that we find in the Bible version called the Message might be a help to you. And this is Eugene Peterson's version of the New Testament. And this is how he handles these particular lines, which have very strong words. He says, that's how it will be when the curtain comes down on history. The angels will come and cull the bad fish and throw them in the garbage. There will be a lot of desperate complaining, but it won't do any good. The main point of the parable, I believe, is that in today's world, when we follow Jesus Christ and share the good news about him, all kinds of people may respond. Maybe a lot of people in your neighborhood, maybe just a few in your neighborhood, but in other places, maybe many, and in some other places again, maybe a few. All kinds of people are likely to respond. We don't have to worry too much about membership requirements. And that's because God, in his time, will sort out the good catch from the bycatch. We need to leave that up to him. And in the meantime, we can expect that many different kinds of people will take an interest in Jesus. Now, to wrap up, I believe that this message that all kinds of people will take an interest in Jesus is a very hopeful message. Think of all the different kinds of people who have taken an interest in Jesus and continue to. I was watching a documentary a few weeks back, and in this particular documentary, it's from a series called The Fall of Civilizations. Anyway, in one short section of this particular documentary, it talks about a Catholic missionary among the Aztec people in Mexico. Now, that was a very horrific story in which the Spaniards, with a kind of a military mindset, were unbelievably brutal. But the story focuses for a few seconds on this one Catholic missionary among the Aztec people. And this missionary collected the stories of the Aztecs and wrote down their history, their legends, translated their language, and recorded their amazing achievements. The Aztecs were willing to share their stories and lives with this missionary. And this is similar to when the Baptist missionary Silas Rand worked in the region where I live today, worked with the Mi'kmaq natives in the 1800s. Those indigenous folks trusted this missionary. They trusted him enough to tell their legends to him. During this past summer of 2023, at our church, we had a vacation Bible camp, vacation Bible school, where we had kids and parents in our building, from kids and parents from the neighborhood, from our friendship circles. Last Christmas, we had a number of those folks back for our Christmas Eve service, and many others also came. And then, of course, there are our mission friends, the Bustons in Rwanda. If you're watching this video, you probably don't know them, but those folks have been, as missionaries, developing relationships with the people in Rwanda for many years. A few weeks ago, a few months now, I led the wedding of our daughter Gwen in Toronto. And I spoke about the time that, like at the wedding, I spoke about the time that Jesus showed up at a wedding. And after the ceremony, a man approached me to say that he appreciated what I was trying to say. And I found out later from Gwen that he is a married gay man, which didn't really surprise me because I knew in advance that a number of the guests would be gay. So, again, different kinds of people. My friends Dan and Danielle Ingram work with families in Alberta at Circle Square Ranch, riding horses and sharing the stories of Jesus with campers. The Evangelical Fellowship of Canada encourage members of Parliament in Ottawa to meet for prayer regularly. The Baptist churches throughout Atlantic Canada encourage us all the time to look for the ways in which God is at work in the lives of our neighbors, in the streets, in homes, and in places like our crisis shelter, the Valley Care Center for young women who are expecting children, and so many different kinds of people, all walks of life, some people in trouble, some people not. Some of the people expressing an interest in Jesus are millionaires. Some are drug addicts. Some love their denomination. I'm credentialed with the Presbyterian Church in Canada, even though I'm presently serving in a Baptist church. Some don't care what denomination their church is, as long as it's a healthy church. Some have large families. Some of the followers of Jesus have no children. Some work in the hospital in your region, and some pour concrete. I meet with people who love to hunt for their protein, but some of Jesus' followers prefer to stay away from meat altogether, and others think that chocolate is a food group. Friends, God is casting a wide net, catching people of all kinds. And this is part of what makes it great to be involved with the people of Jesus in today's world. Whatever your background, God loves you and welcomes you. Whatever your background, the churches in your neighborhood love you and welcome you. I know maybe we've had negative experiences with churches, and that definitely happens, and I don't want to diminish any of that, but we have to, I think, also find a way forward. Whatever your background, you are loved by God and welcome to plug in every way you can. And when the Lord returns, we may discover that the bycatch is pretty small, and that the true people of God, as it says in Revelation chapter 7, are an enormous crowd, so great a catch that no one could count them.